I think we've got a pretty good presentation for you guys today. With my role at Mitsubishi Electric, utilities and performance construction, my team works specifically with utilities, more than just utilities, but we work with the thousands of utilities across the United States who are in the process of developing heat pump policy right now, and we help them create policy, whether it's what the metrics need to be for a program, or even just educating them about air source heat pumps. And on the performance construction side, we have a newer team who's dealing with how do you implement heat pumps into new construction, especially today with our buildings are becoming tighter and tighter, which is a great thing, but it creates other challenges. And this type of technology is particularly good for performance construction, whether it's a large building or a small building, because of its capability to be variable capacity. And I'll talk a little bit about the compressor and how that works today during our presentation. So for those of you who are not here, that's a picture of me minus, I'm here without the hat, and I've got a very shiny head, which is great. And this is a picture of me a couple weeks ago. I took an early boat ride out to Narragansett Bay, and it's beautiful out there. I love it. We had this amazing day. We got a little bit wet, but it was the earliest that I've been out in the boat yet this year, and I'm a passionate boater and outdoor enthusiast. And you know, you've got this beautiful view of Narragansett Bay. You look over and you see these cooling towers behind you, and kind of it's a little bit of a bummer, right? A little more on that later, though, right? Oh, don't spoiler! Spoiler alert. So we're going to talk a little bit about strategic electrification today and what that is. And you know, we're at this crossroads where energy efficiency and climate policy are sort of inextricably linked. The focus has been on energy efficiency for the past decade, and now the shift to climate policy and electrification is really taking over. It's really exciting, and you know, we're seeing all these terrific reports. You may or may not be familiar with these two, both from Sierra Club, Pathway to Clean Energy Future in North Carolina. So a great report here on financial tools for the electric sector, which is a big deal, right? How do we finance this? But take a look at this. I mean, this is just in the last year. All of these reports came out from every environmental organization, whether it's you know, Rocky Mountain Power's economics of electrifying buildings, to National Grid's 80 by 50 policy, to RAP series, New Efficiency New York. Everyone's coming out with their interpretation of what we need to do. And the great thing is that they pretty much all come down to that same realization about strategic electrification and electrifying.
A big clarification question. What, I know EVs, what's HP?
Heat pumps.
Oh,
yeah.
All right.
So really they come down to this same conclusion, is that we need to green the transportation sector, or I should say the delivery of electricity. And we need both the transportation and building decarbonization to be handled by electric vehicles and heat pumps. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And so if you take a look at this pie chart represents roughly the 4.2 quadrillion BTUs of direct fossil fuel use here in New England and New York. A lot of fossil fuel. And it's dominated by two major components, right? You've got the transportation sector, both light duty and heavy duty vehicles. And you've got buildings, residential and commercial, both heat and hot water. And 46% of fossil fuel use in this region is dominated by residential and commercial space and water heating. So if we want to have impact on carbon, we have to lower our use of fossil fuels. If we want to lower our use of fossil fuels, we need to attack these sectors: transportation and residential and commercial heat and hot water. It's pretty simple, right? Right. Residential and commercial buildings account for approximately 40% of the nation's total energy demand, about 75% of electrical use. That's incredible. Those are incredible statistics. So what is strategic electrification? You can pretty much, you know, take this down to three main components. First of all, enhance the end use and the efficiency of our end use products, or you know, anything from you know, our TV sets, our computers. And you know, they've done a great, Energy Star has done a nice job. It's created these programs. We've we've definitely raised the efficiency of our light bulbs, our end use products, and that's so if we can make everything as efficient as possible, that's step one. The second step is decarbonize our grid, right? More wind, more solar, and as we decarbonize the grid, we've had programs that are Massachusetts has got a great example of programs. So we decarbonize the grid, and then the third step, which is probably the hardest of all, and that is convert our end uses, both EV to EVs and buildings to heat pumps. And we call this thermal end use. What do you want to call it? They call it in Massachusetts renewable thermal. But that's hard. And Paul mentioned at the beginning here, why is it so hard? Well, think about it. I think renewable thermal buildings are harder than EVs even. Every vehicle has a steering wheel and a gas pedal, and it's just a transition. You got to get people to buy this instead of this. But a building, every single building is a custom installation, every single one, right? We would have to customize the design of this building if we wanted to. Every house is different, and so there's no standardized answer. It's you got to go in. A contractor has to design it and has to make it work, and that's the growth. It has to be comfortable. It has to be efficient, right? And it has to be healthy. We have to promote health with filtration. So those are the steps to strategic electrification, but they do both come down to EVs and heat pumps. Give you a little bit of context. I've been working closely with the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. I'll talk about that in a moment. But to give you a context for New York City. Now, New York City has an 80 by 50 goal, like many other organizations do and other cities do. But what is in addition to 100% deep energy retrofits required, 50 to 60% of buildings, in order to meet the 80 by 50 goal, have to convert to high efficiency electric heat pumps, and 90% to heat pump water heaters. That's incredible. Those are incredible numbers when you take a look at the vast of New York City as an example of trying to convert to get to this 80 by 50. It's a daunting task, but you can see that this is what the math is pointing to and where we need to go. What's great right now is that utility programs are still extremely aggressive on efficiency spending. What you're seeing here from Navigant is a projection out through 2028 that shows that efficiency spending will top $11 billion through energy efficiency programs and utilities by 2028, and that's a national statistic. This is a national statistic, and what's great that I try to inform our colleagues and the colleagues that I work with at my company is that a lot of this will represent new heat pump programs, brand new incentives, and we are flooded right now with utilities requesting to help them create programs, as I mentioned before. But what you're also seeing is a reallocation of existing incentives. So the incentives are continuing to grow, but a lot of those programs will switch from fossil fuel programs over to heat pump programs. So the impact is going to be even greater than just that incremental year-by-year rise on heat pumps. So that's exciting, but more on that a little bit later. You know, and this we know that this electrification movement is real. I showed you all those reports, and now after the reports, that we're starting to see the implementation of some of the plans that came out of those reports. But you can see, look at here, the 20 fastest growing occupations, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from 2016 to 2026, solar PV installers and wind turbine technicians, right? The fastest growing, not even by a little bit, by a lot, those two. Clean energy jobs grew 3.6% in 2018 and outnumber fossil fuel jobs now 3 to 1. So we're moving in the right direction, which is terrific. At the same time, there's a major emphasis on building more efficiently. And we're seeing that all over the country. Recent above code growth, we're seeing a lot of mandates in voluntary programs. And we break those down into those two categories. Mandates, things like stricter building codes, legislation like RPSs and APSs in Massachusetts, renewable standards, et cetera. Anything that's mandated, we're seeing a lot of that. A great example is California's Net Zero 2020, which is requiring net zero construction starting in 2020 for their, according to Title 24. And then, of course, you see voluntary programs. And we've all heard of different Energy Star homes. Passive House is a voluntary program, right? we're starting to see more and more construction of passive type homes out there. Zero net energy, which is great, and then also zero net energy ready, right? If you're not ready to put the panels on your roof, that's fine, but let's build the construction to be ready to accept those panels when it's time. And the great news is, from our perspective, is that this is a great application for ductless, zero net energy, especially with the homes that are passive or zero net, that have very, very small micro loads, right? You might have a 3,000 square foot house that only has a 1-ton heating load, which is incredible, right? And now we have the technology that can handle that load. Ductless, we're going to talk about that, but that's a type of heat pump, and you may be familiar with the unit that you hang up on the wall. That's what we manufacture at Mitsubishi. Yeah. So I'll show you a little bit about that. Just on a little bit more about, there's a great website out there called the Zero Energy Project, and you all might want to go on that website and just cruise around a little bit. They've got case studies, and they're really, really pro low load home building. So cost of ownership. I just give you 2 examples from the Zero Energy Project. One is from Oregon and one is from Massachusetts. In this example, there's a home in Massachusetts, a smaller home, 1,200 square foot, that was decided that they wanted to go to a net zero home. And they added about, I think it was about $40,000, yeah, it says here, $40,000 worth of additional, they added a PV system, which was the majority of it, but super insulation, double-studded walls, hot water heating system, better windows. And
this was new construction?
This was new construction. And by doing this, they spent about $40,000 more, but after all the incentives in the market here in Massachusetts, they only spent about 4.6%, not less than 5% more, have a better home for less money.
And what did that 4.6% end up in terms of?
It actually says here, yeah, there it is right there. It was $40,000 more, but it was about $9,000 after incentives, about total of $9,000. So the incentives were significant. What's available is tremendous, and it's always changing. So this could be an older example. I'm not sure what year it was from, but the good news is these incentives are designed to jumpstart the market. We've been able to do that in Massachusetts, and you'll hear from Amy a little while about some of these programs that are just why we're taking such a great lead here in Massachusetts on policy. All right, so let's talk a little bit about heat pumps themselves. This is about challenging your thinking and how you control your home. This is a great example. So typically when you go into a house, you turn you come in, you turn the foyer light on, you turn the hallway light on, you go into the bedroom, you turn that light on, walk-in closet or what have you, one by one. It's how we do it. We don't have a single light switch that turns every light on, but yet there's your thermostat. We turn the thermostat on, and the whole building, we cool or heat the entire building. Why do we do that? That doesn't make a heck of a lot of sense from an energy efficiency standpoint or from a comfort standpoint, because everybody here has a different desired temperature. So that's where ductless comes in. It allows you, ductless heat pumps allow you to put different components in indoor units in different rooms and heat different spaces for more comfort, as I said, for more health, and of course for more efficiency. We're not heating and cooling spaces that don't need to be heated or cooled. Make sense? All right. What's magical and what has evolved to allow this to happen has a lot to do with the technology in the compressor. And the compressor is in the outdoor unit. These systems use refrigerant, and they circulate refrigerant throughout from the outdoor unit to the indoor units. Much more efficient than blasting a whole large volume of air that's leaking and getting used or not getting used. These systems are very efficient.
Lower units being hertz is a typo, or is that you are?
No, that is the frequency. So this is an example of a conventional air conditioning or heating unit, right? First they come on, they slam on, the compressor comes on, and there's this long duration at 60 hertz of trying to get the temperature, the set temperature in the room down to the area of cooling that you desire. And then what happens is that system then turns off, and then it turns back on again after it's too cool. It goes up, it's too hot, so then it comes on again, and so on and so forth. And constantly taking this compressor and turning it on and turning it off and turning it on. It's not good for the compressor. It's not good for comfort, etc. And certainly not good for energy efficiency. It wastes, is a very high starting current, and it wastes a lot of energy. And utilities also really don't like this slamming on a system that comes on at full bore and then comes off and then comes on. Inverter compressors work very differently. They're much smoother and easier on the home and system. First, there's a very low starting current, and much better. The soft start is much better for the utility, and it's much better for the electric system in its whole. These systems then ramp up past 60 hertz. They can go up to 130, 140 hertz, and quickly, very quickly cool or heat the space. And then what happens is they adjust the rotation speed, and they come down and just hum along it. Much lower energy efficiency, much lower, about 30 hertz or so. And it maintains the comfort in a much tighter band. Maintains the comfort, it's quick, and it's much more energy efficient. Does anybody have any questions? Do you understand sort of how that works? Does that make a little bit of sense? All right, good.
What is it actually setting? So when it comes down, so you describe it as something per second here, right? Is that?
Yeah, so think of it as cruise control on your car, right? Where you set it, and as you're going up the hill, it gives it a little bit more gas. As you're coming downhill, it gives it a little bit less gas. That's what this system is doing. It's varying its capacity to the demands of the space, as opposed to a traditional system which just senses. It's a fixed volume of air, turns on, blasts the area, turns off, on, off. This is just kind of.
Why do you call it hertz?
That's the frequency of that it's operating at.
The rotation speed of the compressor.
Okay.
Took me a minute to figure that out too.
Yeah, indeed. We are in the United States. Our electric system is set at a 60 hertz, so that's the standard that gets sent out from the power company. What happens here is the inverter takes that power and inverts it and allows it to be variable capacity, so you can go up above 60 hertz or down. But the other system, the old systems, just operate at 60 hertz. That's it. That's what this is showing you here, right? On to 60 hertz, off, on, off, on, off.
On the traditional one, are there systems that would allow the 60 hertz to go to 0 when it's approaching the red line rather than waiting until it passes? Because
no,
yeah, this one, by the time it switched off, it had overshot.
that's what happens, right? That's why they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, could it switch off at, say, 70, 75, or 76 or 7,
Sure.
and let it coast?
That's typically what it does, but look at how wide the set is. You know, from 77 to 73, it's a very broad band that is typically uncomfortable. Whereas your inverter compressor keeps that band much tighter because it's always operating. And people wonder why. How could this be more efficient if it's always on? You know, we get calls sometimes that my system doesn't shut off, and you say, good. That's exactly what you want. You want it to run, you know, and what happens with it running all the time? More filtration. So now you have healthier air, right?
Is this part of why the new air heat pumps function at lower outside temperatures?
Yes, I'm going to talk about that next. So the technological advancements of these systems have come a long way since they were developed in the Far East, in Japan. Now there's more different types of heads than ever before, and many of us are used to that one in the top left. That's the one that hangs up on the wall that you see mostly. They're the most efficient units of all. But you have a floor mount system, ducted. That one here is a ducted system. We call it slim duct, and it's not meant to push a lot of air, but you might put a drop into the master bedroom and into the master bathroom, or two bedrooms that are side by side, kids' bedrooms, again, allowing you to zone the system. This one here is a ceiling suspended. It fits inside this 2x2 grid right here, and it blows in 4 different directions. We've got a brand new one that is very similar to the wall mount, but now it fits into 2x16 construction, 16 inch on center. So that's really great. Builders love this because now instead of having something on the wall, it's just in the ceiling like this. Outdoor unit. And then this is one of our newest products. This is our full air handler. So we can go in and remove the natural gas or oil fired furnace and slip this full static system right in it.
Is that available for forced hot water or only for ducted?
Only for ducted because it's air to air.
Air to air.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. But you know, 90% or more of the country is all forced hot air, where we just see hydronic for the most part here, a little bit in the Midwest.
Yeah, it's very popular here.
It is.
You know,
I have it in my house. Yeah.
That's what I have.
Yeah.
You know.
I have a question, what's the capacity of that?
Those are all different capacities. You can go up to 4 tons.
And the smallest?
1 ton. Yeah. Here's the question that you asked. So, this is a chart of the way that these systems work. Outdoor temperature, heating capacity. At 47, 45 degrees, old heat pump technologies, which gives the whole industry a bad name, we're still calling it a heat pump, started to derate at 47 degrees, and by the time you got to 17 degrees outdoor temperature, it was blowing cold air. And the advent of what we call hyperheat that came along, gosh, now only about 7 or 8 years ago, completely changed the industry. We've got 100% capacity to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, which we don't see very often around here. And below that, to minus 13, most of our systems are still operating between 93 and 76% of capacity. So it's a design component. You design it to be able to carry your design temperature and what you need for capacity at that low temperature. Our design temperature in Massachusetts, in Boston, I think is 7 degrees. So at 5, we're getting 100% capacity, which is a game changer, complete game changer. And all the manufacturers have this. It's not just Mitsubishi, which is great for the industry. It's allowing us to take this technology, put it all over the United States, including Canada. Any questions about that?
Yeah, I do have one. So what's the secret sauce here? I mean, if you're trying to make like a 70 or 80 degree difference, can change, and you're trying to extract that amount of heat out of 0 degree air, how does one do that?
Well, there's heat in the air.
Yeah, well, I know that, but
at 0 degrees, there's still heat. So if you think of it this way, as long as you are able to bring the refrigerant down to a colder temperature as the ambient temperature warms the refrigerant up, and then when it's put back through the process of reheating it, it gets to a higher temperature. That's how a refrigeration system works. It's the same thing that happens in your refrigerator at home.
all right. So it's just accepted as magic, and
It is basically magic.
yeah.
No, but it has to do with the heating, the evaporation, condensation temperatures.
You got it. The
Right?
phase
So-
change of the refrigerant.
So when this refrigerant has the capacity to go to a much lower outside temperature.
That's right.
Than what they previously used. So it's not the idea of heat pump, it's the innovation in the refrigerant that leads.
And the compressors themselves are much more robust
With
today.
that differential hurt.
Correct.
So part 2 of my question is, in terms of efficiency, electricity used,
Yes.
is that linear as the temperature decreases, or does
It is not.
I didn't
So
think
your
so.
COP does derate. So you're much less efficient at this point here than you are up here.
Yeah.
But you're so efficient up here that your overall efficiency, your overall annual COP or your SEER, seasonal energy efficiency ratio, is much higher versus an oil-fired system.
Oh, versus an oil fire.
At -5, how does this efficiency compare to that of a geothermal?
At those lower temperature bins, geothermal is typically more efficient because it's getting its heat from a constant
50 degrees.
source.
Yeah.
Always getting a constant source. This is getting its heat from the air, so it's derating as you go.
Yeah.
But no longer derating along this line, it's derating just over here. Just in those few temperature bins. And what's interesting is if you look at the temperature bins for Boston, there's very few hours down in this range.
Right.
You might be talking about 20 or 30 hours. The whole
Question.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, finish your sentence and then I just want to.
No, go right ahead.
You mentioned the refrigerant. Is the refrigerant a fluorocarbon and is it a greenhouse gas if it leaks?
Yeah, so today, the mandated refrigerant is our, oh gosh, I've lost the name of it. I can't remember the R number, but yes, so there is a standard right now that's going through DOE to change to a different, to R32, I believe, where they're making, deciding what the mandate is going to be. And there are pluses and minuses to every refrigerant, from my understanding. I'm not a refrigerant expert, but there is I have a paper here actually that I just got. Hang on one second. The pluses of a new refrigerant are that it's more efficient, less global warming potential. On the downside, it's slightly flammable. So, so there's pluses and minuses to everything, but they're making a lot of progress. Let's see here. Does it give us the R number? I apologize. I just don't have the R.
It's okay. Maybe as a follow-up, you could give us some comments about the refrigerant and the environmental issues associated with refrigerant selection.
Absolutely.
And in fact, if there's a trade-off of the efficiency curves you're showing on the screen versus other environmental factors, just to try to, what are the trade-offs in selecting refrigerants?
Okay, I'll get you some information on that.
Is refrigerant a choice that the consumer can make, or?
No, it's
I
not.
didn't think so.
No,
Yeah.
no. There's a mandate from DOE, but there are voluntary states. California is making a complete change in 2023 to the new refrigerant.
But that transition has happened multiple times before, so
It
we're
happens
several
all the time.
generations out
Yes.
from the original bad refrigerant that is the
Freon.
problem.
Yeah.
Right, and the stuff up in the atmosphere is a much earlier generation.
Correct. Correct. These refrigerants today are much better. Each generation is that much better. But again, there are trade-offs on efficiency, or in this case, slightly flammable. So they have to figure out how they're going to deal with that. Because today's refrigerants have no flammability.
Can like a water-based heating system, like a lot of places like mine have, can they look at air source heat pumps?
They can look at air source as long as they want to go. That's what's ideal about these systems, that if you wanted to put it in a hydronic house, a house that has baseboard, you can still do it by hanging the units in various spaces. You don't have to go put really expensive and intrusive ductwork in. On the other hand, to answer your question, there are also air-to-water systems that are not as prevalent here in the United States. They are on the commercial side, but on the residential side, they're not quite as prevalent. And there's a whole host of reasons. One of the big reasons is that our water systems here, our boilers, and they're high temperature, and air to water heat pumps provide low temperature, so you can't put it through the same baseboard. But on a new construction home, it's terrific. Radiant heat in the floor, very efficient systems. So you're going to start seeing more and more of those air to water systems, and then also air to water heat pumps for water sources, for water, domestic hot water. You'll see a lot more of that coming in. Like the Sandin unit that's out today, which uses CO2 as its refrigerant. That's a new product. So newer innovations are starting to come in all the time, which is really exciting. The movement's going to accelerate even more now with electrification. Speaking of electrification, what you see here is a map of, and not even close to all of the cities that have dedicated themselves to the 80 by 50 goal. And we're particularly working with I mentioned the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance before, and we've been working very closely with these 4 cities: New York, Burlington, Vermont, Washington, D.C., and Boulder, Colorado. And newly added are Salt Lake City and Berkeley, California. And then the exciting thing is we're understanding that Seattle, San Jose, and Boston are all going to join on with this effort for the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, which is basically an 80 by 50 initiative. New York has their rev process. Is there a way you could move that? Can this be dragged?
Yeah.
Elsewhere?
Yeah.
Or just minimized?
Probably gonna be all the above.
Oh, okay, good. That's perfect. New York State has a very, very aggressive clean energy agenda, which is awesome because they were really taking a back seat for the last 4 or 5 years, 8 years since I've been here. There have been basically no policies for.
Yeah, we're pretty much aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really exciting that they're jumping on this process and trying to take the lead, which is great. They've got 40% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030. Their energy use goal is 23%. It's 600 tera-BTU. And that corresponds to 6 billion therms of natural gas, or 4.2 billion gallons of oil, 6.7 billion gallons of propane. So they've got very, very aggressive goals. And of course, by 2050, an 80%, 80 by 50 reduction, and 100% renewable electricity. Their heat pump goal in New York, NYSERDA has recently announced that they're looking to do 120,000 heat pumps a year by 2030, and 400,000 heat pumps a year by 2050. So they've got significant goals. And there's other things happening, not just in New York, but we're starting to see gas moratoriums.
Yeah, we're familiar with those.
Okay, great. You might get, we saw recently in the cold snaps this winter, Rhode Island, they had whole sections of Rhode Island that were without gas service. And of course, Westchester County in New York is one of the great examples. No new connections, residential or commercial. And the Public Service Commission is dedicating over 250, I understand that's even grown beyond the $250 million mark, specifically to deploy heat pumps and energy efficiency, and also low and moderate income programs to help get those who can't afford to convert off of their fossil fuels. So that's pretty exciting. This program, they want to displace gas for the equivalent of 90,000 homes, and what they hope this will do is allow the existing gas mains to service their customers, their existing customers, without any new additions, which is good by me. Massachusetts, Amy's going to cover this, so I'm not going to really go in detail. There's a residential program that ended the Mass Clean Energy Center. Mass Save has a program, and both commercially and residentially, and then there's the APS. I think you're going to go over that, the Alternative Portfolio Standard. All right.
So the numbers what numbers you cited for New York for new heat pumps, those are those primarily retrofits?
They're both retrofits and new construction, but the retrofit market dwarfs the new construction market nationally, right? You've got upwards of 5 million systems that go in a year in the country, and 1 million of those, or less than 1 million of those, are
So where Boston, for example, is in the middle of a huge construction boom, and we've got, I don't remember how many, 100 and 200, whatever, buildings in the queue, and every one of them is queued up for gas.
And that's
part
of what keeps me up at night.
Okay.
You guys are just doing a great job of leading into the next slide. All right, so for those who are Game of Thrones fans, the Night King keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
But really, this is what keeps me up at night. Let's talk about a few of these things, and this is places where of course, Sierra Club can help with some of the policy initiatives. All right, first of all, the number of initiatives is overwhelming, right? I mean, personally, with Mitsubishi, who has put ourselves out there, we have people in my position and the people who work for me who specifically go out and work with utilities and utility program implementers, environmental organizations, educating and putting policy in place. Well, electrification is leading to heat pump programs, which is leading to thousands of inquiries to say, help us create programs. So it's getting a bit overwhelming. It's a good problem to have, don't get me wrong, but it's still, a bit overwhelming. China. Well, yes, China has canceled 105 coal-fired power plants, but they still have a lot of power plants. You know, and that's not necessarily what keeps me up at night. I'm sure it does for y'all, but you know, they've got things like 99% of the EVs that are sold in the world are sold in China. They're cranking away over there, and part of what keeps me up about these is that, you know, it's only a matter of time when we're starting to see some inferior product come in to the U.S. And what happens with problematic product is it gives the whole industry a bad name. So we've got to have real high quality systems that are put in by trained contractors, and that's a barrier, right? It's another barrier, the contractor training. Having the right functionality, you know, we've got to go out there and you know, the whole industry hasn't matured yet, and it goes. This one here goes along with the next one about like things like features about demand response. There isn't a standard. There's standards for open ADR languages that demand response is, but there isn't a centralized organization that's telling heat pump manufacturers this is what you need to have in your systems. So, you know, you try your best to tell your development people in the factories what they need to build in, but it's not so easy. You're telling them to create a multi-million-dollar research project into building demand response into these things, and they look at you and go, "What's the payback?" So there's, you know, it's a real thing here. They can't just spend money without knowing what the market's going to bring. So, you know, obtaining the proper intelligence and design requirements for things like demand response. Time of use rates give me a lot of, and I won't go too deep into it, but a lot of it has to do with the fact that heat pumps are part of the peak, right? You come home from work and what do you want to do? You want to turn your air conditioning or your heat on.
Plug your car in.
And plug your car in, and now all of a sudden, now, the thing about cars and hot water is you can heat hot water in the middle of the night. You can charge your car in the middle of the night, but you can't turn your heat pump on. Wait to turn your heat pump on until 8 p.m. when the rates go down. So we're coincident with the peak, and my concern is that utilities aren't really necessarily taking that as much into account when they design these new time of use programs.
Do you ever think about building battery backup?
Yeah. So that's, once again, there's the next line. Right, it creates this need for storage. We don't necessarily, and I'm sure somewhere in Japan our company is working on storage, but here in the U.S. we don't have a storage solution, but there are storage systems. You know, of course you're seeing Tesla, Sonnen, which was just bought by Shell. Of course, Shell Oil is now changing their entire platform to be a renewable energy leader. We'll see how that works out. So yes, there is a need for storage. We don't have a package system that does that yet, but I do believe that that's the next step. Yeah, to get you through those peak hours. You come home, you get, you know, you're not taking power from the grid. You're taking power from your battery system, which just charged at 1 o'clock in the afternoon with the sun.
Or 1 in the morning.
1 in the morning, but think about it. If it's 1 in the morning, where's the power coming from?
The nuclear they can't shut down.
It might.
So when?
It could. But we know that in the afternoon, there's a surplus of energy, and that power is all renewable. So we want to stuff that into our batteries and then redispatch it in the peak hour. Policy, I talked a little bit about mandates. For instance, having the right methodology. So the next big push is going to VRF. And VRF is the commercial version of what I've described to you today. Most of what we've talked about today is about the residential market, the smaller heat pumps. But VRF, variable refrigerant flow, is the large scale. We can do office buildings. You go to Japan, 80% of the buildings are run off of variable refrigerant flow, high rises and multifamily and everything. These are big systems that can get into the hundreds of tons.
Okay, I was gonna ask what are the restrictions around VRF?
Yeah.
Whether, you know, in the Boston, New England area in terms of size, floors.
Yeah, there really is no restriction. It's just a matter of can you find the right spaces to put these systems in, to have the outdoor units, you can put them on the roof. Sometimes you have to steal some space, you know, at you know, some maybe 5 stories up to get the next 5. The limitations are on the refrigerant and how far it can go from a lateral standpoint and from a height standpoint. But it's all designed, it's designed that way.
I just did a quick search, and ISO 5151 seems to apply to heat pumps. So, they're talking about standardization of, residential and commercial. So what's the limitation in terms of the standardization that you were talking about?
In terms of standardization of...
Yeah, you said that there was no standardization, but ISO 5151 seems to provide a standard.
For which part? Standard for... There's a lot of different-
Residential and commercial heat pumps.
Yeah. Not
I
exactly
think
sure
he's
what the question
referring to, so you're talking about the heat pumps, Matt, and standardization of the technical operations. I think you were talking about there's no standardization around design requirements, for example, for time of use rates.
is. Correct.
Okay,
Which is very different. That's coming from the Utilities and Public
From
Service
the-
Commission.
gotcha.
I can talk to you more about that after. A couple of other things, and then I want to turn it over to Amy. This is really important, no black eyes. What I mean by that is we've got to have pilots out there, right? We need to make sure that we're constantly measuring the effectiveness of this technology so that consumers will buy it. And building owners and developers will actually do this. And, so we got to keep an eye on these pilots and make sure that they get installed by professional contractors and who do a good job. Again, one bad turn here. We've had that happen in the industry in various places. There's an example in California where they did a pilot study and just horribly installed, and they didn't know what they were doing, and it set the industry back a bit. So we gotta make sure that we're very careful here. Yeah. You have an example of one?
I've been through that.
Okay.
Since remedied.
Good.
3 small claims court cases and settled.
Yeah,
Found
we-
a competent person.
We do.
Yep, and this is my last one. Hidden barriers. These are very important, and I could talk to you guys more about this in a little while. But this one here, the need for early retirement, this is so important. Some of these things are hidden. What I mean by hidden is they're not so obvious. But when do you break down? On the heating side, when do you break down? You break down inevitably. It's called Murphy's Law for a reason, right? In the middle of the winter, and what happens is the contractor shows up and says, I can give you a heat pump, or I can give you what's on the truck. And if I give you what's on the truck, I'll have you back up in the next couple hours. That's devastating. Upwards of 80% of breakdowns occur under duress in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the winter, or in the summer in some cases in places like Houston. So this need for early retirement, this is a big one, and I think this is something that Sierra Club can help with on a policy side. Is we've got to push more early retirement. We've got to get people to think in August and September and October, I've got a 25-year-old system, it's on its last legs, I want to replace it now. Oh, by the way, there's an incentive for $1,000 if I do it now, it's only $500 if I wait. How do we get consumers to be thinking about early retirement? It's such a critical component that nobody's talking about. Now, I've been sort of trying to wave that flag out there. And then this last one, it's ridiculous to me that we've got all these fantastic rebates in Massachusetts, and you still have thousands and thousands of dollars available for natural gas replacements. So that same contractor stands in front of a customer and says, look, there's $3,000 you can get from Mass Clean Energy Center and Mass Save, Phillies, etc. Oh, by the way, there's still $3,000 available for natural gas boiler or furnace. It's just devastating because now the customer looks at that and goes,
I should talk to you about that afterwards,
Yeah.
okay? But I have some serious questions about that. So
Great,
but,
okay.
but not now. We got to give Amy a chance.
We are, okay. So, in the end, wouldn't it be great if that's what our palette looked like? We could build beautiful, efficient buildings. This is really what it looks like, right? There's Manhattan, tremendously inefficient, buildings that are challenged to retrofit. We've got our work cut out for us, but there is a solution. It's growing. We need to be there for new construction. We need to be there for retrofits, or we lose them for 25 or 30 years, right? In the end of an era, or I prefer to call it the beginning of an era.
Do you have a movie?
One thing that So China has,
Oh, there it goes. That's my son.
That's so.
I am
cool.
not
Thank you.
at all sad to see this last coal-fired plant in Massachusetts go away.
Yeah.
The best news of all is they're turning this into a wind facility.
Yeah,
I'm very excited to see what comes out of this, but hopefully they're gonna support the.
the huge announcement about this just today.
So great, so
So,
great.
yeah,
That
it's
is
gonna
the
be,
reason why we were on that
Yeah.
yesterday, 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
We're a little bit cold.
a company has bought this and is gonna invest $650 million in that, making it an onshore, high voltage DC transmission hub for offshore wind, plus 400 megawatts of battery storage on site. So it just hasn't really gotten public yet, but it's,
Thank you very much for your time.
thank you very much, Eric. Thank you.
maybe
But we have,
China produces virtually all of the electric vehicles.
They have an incredible progress right now on the EVs.
They do.
They're taking off with it, and we're just lagging behind here. You know, I mean, they can't keep the Chevy Volt anymore.
They hear?
Can I lend her the remote?
Absolutely.
So I'm making it easier. And I just want to recognize that there was a question in the chat, and I imagine there's questions in the room, but it makes sense to hold those till the
we
end.
need to hold them at this
Yeah,
point,
okay.
make sure Amy has her time.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. Eric, that was great. I think our two presentations are gonna really hopefully get the most out of your time here. So I'm Amy Polka. I have a background in energy. I worked for the State Department of Energy Resources for 6, 7 years, 8 years, something like that. And then I worked for Mass Save with Eversource in the evaluation department for a couple years. Right now I'm working with a volunteer group, Sustainable Framingham, working on making our own city government and city operations more sustainable and community-wide. All right, so this is kind of an overview. Eric gave us a lot of the big picture about how do heat pumps work and what's the national context, what's the markets. I'm going to focus on Massachusetts specifically and kind of our evolution of heat pumps policies and programs over time. There's a lot of info in this slide. If we can go back and look at it, but what I wanted to show first of all is that there's a lot of programs that have evolved over time through the energy efficiency programs with Mass Save and other programs. And then there's also market mechanisms, that alternative portfolio standard that Eric mentioned. And both of these are evolving and in ways that are going to continue to grow the support for heat pumps. So the first thing, like Eric mentioned, is that there did not exist cold climate heat pumps, 10 years ago. So the first thing that folks needed to see out here, the utility programs, is do these work in our climate? So I have an example here of an evaluation from an Emera Maine pilot. And this is from 2013. And the goal was really just to see, do these heat pumps work way up in Northeast Maine, where it's really cold. I know there are other, I think Vermont also did some pilots and looking at do these heat pumps work in our cold climates? The good news is they do. They're technology that works. They do result in, looking at the conclusions that this study drew, the second one is that they do result in cost savings. Folks that use them more saw more cost savings, and we'll get into that a little more in a little bit later. And then number 3, I think, is key, is customer education. It's really key to maximizing the cost savings. So I'm going to go into that more at a later date, just file it away for now. All right. So they work in our climate. The next step is figuring out, well, which ones work in our climate. The HSPF, the heating seasonal performance factor, I think, Eric, you said this, it only goes down to 17 degrees. That's its lowest temperature test rating. And so for these cold climates, we didn't have a way to evaluate which products actually would meet the needs. So the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnership jumped into this space and created what they called a qualified product list from a cold climate air source heat pump specification. So basically they set out all the technical details. They looked around all the manufacturers and models, which ones met these specs, which ones didn't, created a list. That list is constantly being updated. They're on the 3rd version right now. It currently has more than 20 manufacturers and 4,000 products on that list. That list is being used by various other folks, programs, both in the Northeast. I don't know about national.
Yeah, they're starting to see states in the Midwest.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a note that very recently, they changed to a web-based format rather than the former Excel file, which was getting a little unwieldy, I imagine. And they're continuing to work in this space for market transformation to bring together different groups to continue to educate all the different policymakers, installers, manufacturers, just so everyone tries to stay on the same page and keep moving forward. I mentioned it's all in the education. So there's all those groups that need to work together and be educated to really get the most out of heat pumps. One of the questions that Paul asked me when we were chatting, and that led me to being here today, is he said, there's a lot of information out there, but we're not sure exactly where it is. Is there a cost-benefit curve somewhere that tells us when heat pumps are cost-effective or not? And
Massachusetts electricity rates.
With Massachusetts electricity rates, and there's a lot of moving pieces to this market. So there's education across the entire spectrum. So I was hoping to have a beautiful cost-benefit curve for you. Instead, digging through my files, I found a slide from a colleague back at Eversource. This is using Connecticut fuel costs, but let me walk you through it. In the bar graphs, that is the cost of the fuel per MMBTU of delivered heating. So what you see is natural gas on the left hand is fairly inexpensive, and your cost goes up across to the right, with electric resistance being your most expensive type of heat. The line graph above shows you your pounds of greenhouse gas emissions per MMBTU of delivered heat. And what you'll see are the 2 dips where there's heat pumps. The one on the left is ground source heat pumps. The one on the right is the air source heat pump. And those have different coefficients of performance. And the reason they are so much less emitting is because of their efficiency. So the good news is people can figure this out. The bad news is to do this constantly while the prices of every fuel are changing, the electric grid mix is changing. It's way too complicated for most of us to get into. So I was really around a presentation to the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council in March by a couple of folks from the Mass Save program. They run the residential program, that they're creating an online calculator that should be able to start helping answer this question. And they'll have it available for what they call their energy specialists. That's all the vendors that work with the program, as well as just their customers. So I don't know much more than this, but hopefully it will be a user-friendly tool where we can look at fuel costs, operating costs, actual fuel consumption, and greenhouse gas emissions, those inputs and outputs, and come up with an answer for your home, your price point. All right, I'm full of optimism. I think that this year might be a really good pivot point for air source heat pumps. There's a lot of reasons for that. Mass Save has incented heat pumps as a more efficient air conditioner for a good number of years. Back on that first slide, you'll see they were able to, I mentioned that in the 2013 to 15 and 16 to 18 plans. So they're basically a more efficient form of air conditioner. Now, if they were comparing that to any other form of heat, they couldn't claim those savings. So they couldn't provide incentives for it because they had to stay within a single fuel. This recent plan, the 2019 to 21 plan, the program administrators are allowed to have multi-fuel savings, and this is just going to it's totally changing their programs in a way that should reduce greenhouse gas emissions a lot.
Can you explain that a little bit more? I kind of got lost there.
Yeah, it's a tough one. So it has to do with how the Department of Public Utilities regulates the savings claimed by the Mass Save program. So they only get incented for savings that they can claim. So there's a lot of rules around that. In the past, for example,
You're reflecting the latest EEAC ruling that happened, they had hearings on earlier this year, is
the
that?
3-year plan.
The 3-year plan
yeah.
just got approved?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. So heat pumps are a great example because between 2016 and 18, when you put in a heat pump, you could go to Mass Save and get a, I don't know, $200 rebate for a more efficient air conditioner. Then you could go to the Clean Energy Center, which is a state quasi-public agency, and get a $500 rebate because they're recognizing, I'm making the numbers up, but it was more. It was a lot more. And because they recognized that you were displacing oil or gas, whatever fuel, fossil fuel you were displacing.
For heating.
For heating. Mass Save could not do that because they could only claim savings within a single fuel type. So if you had electric resistance heat, I don't know if they had, there's so few people with electric resistance heat out there, they didn't develop a program to claim those savings.
I see. So the difficulty in 2016-18 was that you were displacing, you were being more efficient with electricity for your cooling.
Yes.
But that's a different, quote, fuel
right.
than the oil or gas that you use.
Exactly.
Okay, I understand.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you for that.
And now that's a key piece. So that's really
All right, so now
buried in the technical weeds.
Yeah,
but
now in 2019.
Now in 2019, we have multi-fuel savings. I showed you they're developing a cost savings calculator. I'm going to talk about integrated controls in education again. But looking at the market projections and record, and Eric, you'll have a good idea whether these numbers I found are accurate or not. 2013, it looked like about 50,000 heat pumps were sold in the Northeast, being New England and New York. 2016 was 75,000. The 2019 Mass Save goal that I found, which is not from primary resource, so we need to check that number after this. I ran out of time. Is they were looking at installing 62,000 heat pumps here alone.
Just in Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts.
Oh, just in Massachusetts.
So in Massachusetts versus.
So that number is quantitatively different than the two numbers.
It is. It is.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay.
Different denominator.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a big market they're going to grow. I think this is a really interesting development as well with the Mass Save programs. We were talking about the different fuels, and one of the things that folks do is they may want to keep their old system and their new system so they can maximize their cost savings. They install heat pumps. Most of the time you don't have any way for those heat pumps to talk to your central thermostat. So my understanding is that the programs have evolved enough that they've worked with manufacturers to bring in some form of integrated controls. So now there can be communication between the air source heat pumps and the central thermostat regulating the boiler or furnace, which is incredible for energy savings, incredible potential. And you can see that in the incentives that they're offering. The incentives that Mass Save is currently offering is for just your generic heat pump, $150 rebate per ton. However, if you use oil or propane, you can have up to $1,600 a ton for a rebate. Electric heat is $1,000, and then with these integrated controls, you can add on $500 a unit. So these are really big incentives.
So if you use natural gas, you don't have any rebate or just a standard one?
Standard, yeah. So natural gas is not cost competitive with heat pumps for retrofit in Massachusetts.
But the new Mass Clean Energy Center.
Yeah. Yep. So I don't even know. Yeah, the standard would be that. So to get at that exact question is really cool. On the left here, just last week, the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is announcing a new program to fill this gap, to compete with natural gas. So they're doing a webinar on it tomorrow if anyone wanted to join in. But it's called their Whole Home Air Source Heat Pump Pilot. It'll provide incentives to compete with natural gas, and importantly, for new construction. So when I was working with Eversource, one of the programs I worked with was the new construction program, and we saw a lot of developers saying, no, we're not using heat pumps. They're not cost effective compared to natural gas. They cost more. So hopefully this program will help to resolve that in new construction and take more homes to a net zero.
Yeah, cost effective is a funny term. It's the cost of the builder to put it in, but then it's the cost of the owner to operate and maintain the thing later, which they're different ways of measuring it. I'm sure the builders are only concerned with the cost to put it in.
That's true. But also in terms of from an owning and operating standpoint, natural gas is still going to be cheaper.
Cheaper.
To operate than a heat pump because of our high electricity rates.
Sorry, that's nothing you can put a solar system on your house.
Yeah, if you have solar on your house, then it's the heat pump would be cheaper.
Absolutely.
Well, it would or it wouldn't, because I have solar on my house and I'm on a net energy plan, so the grid to me is just a giant battery, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference. I can sell my electricity at full high Massachusetts rates.
Yeah.
Or I can run my heat source pump with it, either one. But either way, it doesn't.
You just bragging.
I
Well,
just brag.
Yeah, that deal.
Reimbursement rates.
Yeah. I was talking about the education, and NEAT is having a workshop about market transformation in June. So again, they're bringing together manufacturers and the utility programs and installers. There's education that needs to happen across every component of the market. I mentioned the clean it, at the beginning we mentioned the alternative portfolio standard. So one thing that I found interesting is last year, the Department of Energy Resources they created a nice 2-pager that says, hey, even if you have a small air source heat pump in your home, you can work with an aggregator and qualify that for the alternative portfolio standard. So in theory, that would be displacing, in theory, that would bring in additional revenue to the owner of those heat pumps.
Has that actually happened?
Yes.
Are there aggregators doing that?
Yes, but not many. It's an embarrassment of riches in Massachusetts. We've got all these wonderful programs, and they all have their own standards and metrics and paperwork, and it's
challenging. On a personal note, I have heat pumps. I tried to work with an aggregator last year, and I just could not get anywhere with anyone because I have a very, relatively small system. If you are an installer and you're able to aggregate every unit you install, now you're talking money, and they'll be willing to work with you. So that's the market growth is gonna help that.
So help me understand. Yeah. So when you put solar on, or at least when you used to put solar on, the installer would always handle your SRECs for you for at least the first 5 years, and it was one of the ways the salesperson could effectively lower the cost of putting in the solar panels, right? I would think that installers are interested in selling and supporting heat pumps would want to be doing the same thing to just lower the overall cost profile by saying, hey, you can qualify for these alternative compliance rec.
Right.
We're trying to get them to do that. They're plumbers and HVAC contractors.
So this is
and there's a lot of specifics behind the program. It has to be 90% of the BTU load of the home. Has to have at least 50% of the size from the previous installation. I mean, there's just all this.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
Very complex.
But I've got a aggregator for you to talk to.
Ah, good. Good.
My understanding also, Mark Sandy, when he did the Net Zero Plus school in Lexington, when they did that they are going to also be aggregating or whatever.
Good. Yeah.
For that. I don't know who they're going to get that, but we did.
I think the commercial space might be a little easier to.
It's
larger at least. If not, no.
No, we're actually working with SCC's been hired by DOER to make it easier.
Yeah.
Basically, because it's just so small. They're pre-minting, so it's like an incentive up front.
Yeah.
They give you $1,500 or whatever right up front, and then you're done.
Yep.
Commercial space has to be measured and metered, and it's very hard to meter refrigerant, and it's
Yeah.
Yeah, but by the way, DOER tried to take away that pre-minting stuff recently. And they have an emergency rule change to do it.
Yep.
That final comment, if you were going to try to comment on that, was yesterday. So, but they are going to retain the pre-mint. They ran into a huge objection to that.
Good.
So,
Will this, he's also, be good for solar installations, kind of replacing the SREC?
No, this
No.
is a different market mechanism. That's the, playing into the renewable portfolio standard.
Mhm.
This is alternative portfolio standard, which created a market, I think it was part of the Global Warming Solutions Act in
Green
2009.
Communities,
Yeah, Green Communities Act, thank you.
2009, I think.
And so it created a market for combined heat and power storage. It's been relatively underutilized, but since then they've been developing renewable thermal mechanisms to play into it. So that the solar will continue on its own separate track.
And what about solar thermal? Because you're saying renewable
Solar thermal does play into this,
Mhm.
into the alternative portfolio standard. And there's a lot of programs coming out for solar thermal water, hot water, and those.
Yeah.
All right, just a couple more. Customer education. So one of the things, there was an evaluation done of the heat pump programs with the Mass Save program. One of the things they noted is that the top 25% of participants that use their heat pumps most, they save significantly more energy than the average of everyone. So that goes to show that how you use it is important. And so Mass Save is aware of this. So they're working on educational materials to help the consumer, to help the decision, and then how to operate it once you have it. People are so used to hearing, leave the house, shut back the thermostat. It's going to take a lot of training to undo. So that's where the education piece comes in. And I think that that's something also that Sierra Club could really help with. Education. The last big education push that Mass Save did were these home energy reports. So I have my example up here. You guys can guess what season it's in. I'm blue on the bottom. My efficient neighbors are in green. All my neighbors are gray. So I have heat pumps. These reports are run off your electricity bill. So I look incredibly inefficient compared to my neighbors because I'm using my heat pumps for heat instead of my oil. When in fact, if you look at the whole picture of my energy use, I am much more efficient than most of those neighbors. So that's where it's how things are framed and how you can educate folks about it. All right, these two slides I can skip for now. Paul had asked about Holyoke and what are the barriers for them really moving forward with being 100% renewable, fossil fuel free. Talking about Holyoke gets into all the complexities of the municipal light plants. So I'm happy to talk about that, but maybe for the sake of time today,
we'll hold that.
we can hold that.
No, I didn't understand anything about it, but
Yeah.
Well, I'm interested in that. Too,
yeah,
but
I think we would all be interested in that.
Yeah.
But we can.
But it's in your presentation, right? That
It is.
We'll have that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm happy to talk about it afterwards. I just want to be sensitive to time.
Yeah, no, I very, very much appreciate that. So that just very quickly, that I don't remember who I talked to about this, but the Merrimack Valley, disaster.
Yep.
There was a hope on some people's part that people wouldn't go back to explosive gas in their house,
Nightmare.
But the rate at which that happened was infinitesimal.
We tried.
Well, there were a couple. There were some major issues, and the top two I think were the houses did not have the electrical service needed for this purpose. They had like a 60 amp service, and in many cases they had like the old knob and tube wiring, which means not only would they not handle the load, but you could not insulate over the top of that. So you could not do energy efficiency, anything, which you really need, I think, for air source heat pumps.
Yeah.
You really need to have an efficient house. The other was that because of the age and so forth of the house, they had an extremely choppy room plan. So, you know, you might have 8 rooms where, say if you were building a house today and you kind of like the open plan, you know, you might have 3 or 4 rooms. Well, they're like, you know, everywhere's a door, you know. So they ran into a problem that they couldn't come up with a scheme. I mean, when you talk about the design for the
That was a
building.
little bit, what you're saying is right, but it was that was more secondary. The primary was that they weren't approving. So we tried, they were not approving it. They had an organization in Louisiana that was their insurance agent, and they basically had no idea what heat pumps were.
Yeah. You're saying you could have overcome all those other problems if they just had approvals?
Absolutely.
We had a,
They should have paid for it.
yeah, we had a volunteer, who lived in North Andover, and he was telling me his name was Sam. His family tried to switch to a heat pump, and they wouldn't approve it because it wasn't a like-for-like replacement.
And they said
And that's
right
the
up
only thing
front.
they would approve.
That's the
Right,
only
and they
problem.
said in all the paperwork, they said that they would pay to go to a different fuel source. So they essentially lied.
Well, so you're saying electrical is not a problem and choppy room designs is not a
No,
problem?
that's why I say that was a secondary issue, which would have, they should have approved it. And they said right up front that they would have approved if the service needed to be upgraded from 60 amp to 200 amp. Why wouldn't the insurance company have paid for that?
Well, because you'd have to rip down all the walls and put in new wiring.
Well, knob and tube you would, not to upgrade your service.
Put in a 100,
Not to put in a new
to put in a
box,
100 amp
but-
panel,
but-
you just put in a new
But
panel.
that's not what they didn't seem to do. So my question really is, that was all preamble. The question is, what is the opportunity here really for residential
I agree.
upgrades?
But David,
That
you
is,
can't tell me that the whole
that?
Merrimack Valley fell into those two categories. They all had either knob and tube or
No, the
service.
people who lived in Andover were doing great. So,
Yeah, but
in
they
North
wouldn't-
Andover, people could change, they also had the,
Yeah.
you know, $20,000 in their hip pocket to
Yeah,
to
but they
make the
wouldn't
change.
they wouldn't approve heat
Who wouldn't approve?
the
Insurance.
insurance. Basically, someone put the kibosh on it.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there were people who just shelled it out and did it.
Well, anyway, so it was against that backdrop that when the mayor of Holyoke is committed to, you know, the 100%, you know, whatever he's committed to, I don't know what exact phrasing he used, he can't get there without, he's talking about massive energy efficiency programs in his public pronouncements.
Yep.
He didn't mention heat pumps, but it would seem to me that there you have a very positively disposed municipal government. And so what would it take, talk about, you know, pilot programs and so forth. You know much more about actually selling these things than I do. I know nothing. But would it be possible to go into a place like Holyoke, which seems predisposed, at least governmentally, to this kind of thing and see if we could get the incentive things all to work and the aggregators to work and all this other kind of stuff to work? Something, in my mind, I was thinking something like the Solarize program, you know, which different towns could go through, where they could get a bunch of people to all sign up to put in
Heat Smart.
Heat Smart.
It's happening now.
That's happening.
I don't think Holyoke's one of the Heat Smart towns, but there's now a dozen.
There's a dozen.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's run through the Clean Energy Center, just
And
like
it's run through the Clean
Solarize.
Energy.
Yep.
Okay.
But again, what's the opportunity for upgrades? You're saying all homes, close, I mean, a very high percentage of residential homes could be upgraded for heat pumps?
Yep.
I know Wakefield is they're trying to do an audit of their home stock, the housing stock in Wakefield, with the idea that some houses will be suitable and some will not, but you're saying they all
Very large
are.
percentage can, because you can run, the way that you can run refrigerant pipe, I have a separate slide and include that, you know, refrigerant piping is 1/4 inch. You can snake that all through the house and hang the unit. So you can do, but, you know, what you were referring to is absolutely a barrier. The chopped up house means that you've got to find a way to get the heat into each space. Cooling goes around corners, heat doesn't. So you really have to have heating in each space, which is why you'd use one of those slim duct units now, maybe drop into two rooms. There's a way to do it. It just gets more expensive, you know, so that becomes a barrier in a place like.
Yeah, but it's a big deal. It's a big difference to say that almost all houses, there's a solution for almost all houses.
There is,
than
but
to say that, and you know, because if otherwise people are going to say, well, you know, I'm kind of stuck with what I'm stuck
It's the
with.
money.
And when the house burns
It's
down,
all
I'll
comes,
change
it
it,
always,
you know?
that's always the case.
Yeah.
So listen, before we wrap this, there's lots of folks on the phone, and I want to make sure they have a chance to ask a couple of questions here too. People in the room tend to dominate. What?
I had a very simple basic question. So, if you have a 5-room house, would that mean you need a system in each house to effectively heat it?
No, not necessarily. You would need to have, each room covered. If you wanted to go to 100%, let's say you wanted to get rid of your fossil fuel, you'd have to have some sort of heating source in every room, like in this room right now. And there. So you have to have a source in every room. It doesn't mean you would have a head in every room. You could have a ducted system that drops into each room, but you would need to have heating in every room. Yes.
Okay, so I would like to give people on the phone an opportunity to ask some questions. So if there are any, speak up.
I know Fran had a question from earlier that we neglected to
Okay.
hear.
Fran, are you still on? You may be on mute.
Didn't know he was on
He
the
gave
line
up.
to begin with.
He gave up? Okay.
I don't know.
All right, well, anyway, thank you both very
I have
much.
a question.
Oh,
There we go.
there we go. Is this Cheryl?
It is.
Hi.
So I've looked into this. Hi. I'm just wondering if the fellow from Mitsubishi knows anything about the air-to-water heat pumps that are available in Europe, because I was looking into that, and because the way I just don't have a good wall space for the air source heat pump upstairs, and I have, baseboard hot water, and I was looking online at some systems that look like you can get some kind of unit that works with your boiler.
Yeah.
And Mitsubishi makes it, and then I was trying to work with a distributor a little bit east of here, and he was all excited, and then he found out they can't get them in the country.
Yeah,
You know anything about
it's called EcoDan, and we have it in Europe, and we're definitely pushing from our standpoint on the efficiency side to try to bring it in. But I was talking a little bit about it before. It's not necessarily applicable to every hydronic system because it's low temperature as opposed to what a boiler puts out is high temp. So you'd have to have
Right.
more radiation, and sometimes you can't
Yep.
put more radiation in the room. So it's perfect. It's great for new construction and hydronic heat, but it's just a business case, to be able to bring it in and spend the millions of dollars. Daikin, one of our competitors, had it in the United States, their version of it a few years ago, and they took it off the market because it just wasn't selling. It's quite expensive. But that being said, I'm seeing a lot of progress on air to water, and I think it's going to. There's even an air to water symposium coming up in a couple of weeks that NEEP is putting on. Stay tuned. I think it's going to happen. I just not in the short term. To help you.
So I just, new construction is a wonderful thing, but there are so many houses that are already standing that have gas boilers for forced hot water. So the solution's going to be like just have it sit there and put in an air source heat pump. But if you don't have the right space for that, then yeah, it'll be great when they have something that can work with it.
Yeah, I think it'll come, but I'm just not sure it's going to be as relevant to the market as we would hope because of the low temp. The air source side is much more flexible. But there's existing product about bringing in, but then there's also a lot of development happening in that space. So
I hope. Thanks.
Question. Air source and ground source.
I'm going to give people on the phone a chance. Carry on. Someone on the phone?
Okay, so this is Bill, and I'm wondering about air to water with radiation. I understand that with hydronic systems in New England, you're typically talking about 180-degree water temperatures in the hydronic system. But what about a radiant heating system, radiant in the floor? Can that run at a lower temperature, and would that be a better application?
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what I was referring to before, where radiant floor heat runs at a much lower temperature, and that's what these air-to-water systems do. The problem being that to make the business case to bring it in has to do more with how much are you doing, and pretty much that's a very, very slim retrofit project. Not many people retrofit with radiant heat. They build a new construction with radiant heat, but you don't see a lot of retrofit. So the question is, how much new construction is there? et cetera, et cetera. I'm just giving you sort of a business case of what they're thinking at the factories. But I do believe, as I mentioned before, there's a lot happening in this space. So I think we're going to see development. You look at hyperheat didn't exist just 8 years ago. So we're going to see a lot of movement in this space over the next 4 or 5 years. A lot of development and exciting things happening.
Okay.
I have Fran's question.
Oh, you do? Okay.
He was having issues with his mute. The question is, I believe this was Eric. You mentioned VRF and limits on refrigerant distances. What do we need to do to A, demonstrate that heat pump technology will work with big new CI buildings, and B, advocate for elimination of gas for new buildings, for example, in Boston?
Yeah, no, that's a great. And by the way, hi, Fran. Good to hear from you. I haven't seen you in a while. It's a great question because they have different barriers on the commercial side than they do on the residential side, right? Residential side barriers are educating contractors to having them, when they're standing in front of a customer, make this an option. A lot of the barriers that we talked about. On the commercial side, it's working with the architects and engineers, and I think that's the main thing, is how do we get architects and engineers to bring this as a solution to their building owners who are their clients. And so it has to do with appropriate and case studies. We talked a little bit about pilots. You could also call it case studies, right? We need more of those. We need the utilities to be doing case studies out there so they can prove the technology. So that just like NEEP did with the cold climate specification, we got to give confidence to the community that this works. It's working all over the world, so it works. It's just we've got to, we're used to designing here with 4-pipe chiller boiler, VAV systems and natural gas and everything. It's a change in mindset.
Well, you could just get the groups, the organizations in Boston that approve these buildings to put it on the checklist.
Well,
I mean,
mandates.
That's one of the
Yeah.
things we're trying to do through our Boston Energy Coalition.
May I ask one more question? Or I couldn't hear.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
This is just, I don't know, maybe a comment/request. I don't know if you guys have any opportunities to speak to the Mass Building Authority, but we just went through a whole school building project out here where we found out kind of a little too late that they were putting in a gas boiler. And then we tried to get them to switch to ground source heat, and they almost switched. And then there was a political, local rising up of, if you just charge us another $35 a year, we're not going to approve the school, so they took it back out. But the bottom line to me is that this is a huge multi-million, tens of millions of dollars investment on the part of the state, and they are in a position to push the envelope more in that direction from the state side, instead of just letting our town, put a $70 million school together with gas heat in 2021 is when it's going to be finished. It just seems so backwards. It just, why?
Framingham. Just approved over $100 million
And
building.
this is Deb. I actually am talking to MSBA about this
Oh,
exact
good.
issue. So,
Thank you.
yeah. And,
Thank you.
Yeah, some contacts over there.
So
And
we'd be
also-
pleased to come in and talk.
Yeah, so I will send him your contact. And also, do you guys know about Abode? Abode is an energy management company. They've been hired, I think it's by MassSave, might be, but I think it's MassSave, to do training to teach architects, builders, building operators about heat pump technology. And I think it's part of the new
That's probably, yeah.
Yeah. So
It was pretty obvious. It was pretty obvious that the architects who had just finished another high school in our area, they just kept the same architects on, and that these guys were really, the gas was just the way they go. That's just, they put in the gas boiler. It was never really brought up until we started screaming.
I think you bring up a good point, which is that do we advocate for mandates? They have in California. The Net Zero 2020 is a mandate. All residential will have solar and be net zero starting next year. And that same mandate in California goes to the commercial market in 2030. So for every building starting in 2030 will need to be built net zero, and then the next step is retrofit. So Massachusetts could do that. We could change the building code and say,
Yeah,
you've
well,
got to, you know, it's a heavy lift.
Sure.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about schools, it's our tax dollars paying for them. It's our tax dollars paying the energy bill. It's like not a private investment. It's a public investment. And it's just a ridiculous thing that they're not, you know, following what they know is a better thing. That's all.
Well, Sharon, I do, I'm looking at the clock. I'd really like to thank our speakers for the day. Oh, no.
Come with the question, Phil.
Yeah.
What's the difference between air source and ground source heat pumps, or is it minor or major?
Oh, it's major. It's huge. It's huge.
Much more expensive for ground source than air source, but more efficient for ground source than air source. So in the end, they're both great technologies. They're just aimed at different markets. It's hard right now to justify the installation cost for a ground source heat pump at a residence.
Mm-hmm.
If you pool residents together, then it's great. If you can have community ground source, it's fantastic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
I am finally going to say final. Thank you both very, very much for being here. I think this is very worthwhile. And we will certainly try to stay in touch and so on. We are now going to have a very